The morning sun barely pierced the thick glass windows of Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, casting a pale glow over the chaos of Terminal 3. Gate 23 buzzed like a beehive kicked into overdrive, luggage wheels screeched against the polished floor. A baby wailed somewhere near the coffee stand, and the intercom crackled with a monotonous voice announcing delays at Gate 19. Travelers shuffled in every direction, some sprinting with briefcases bouncing, others slumping in plastic chairs, eyes glued to phones. The air smelled of burnt coffee, cheap perfume, and the faint tang of jet fuel wafting in from the tarmac. It was just another Tuesday, the kind of day where nothing extraordinary was supposed to happen. Amid the clamor stood James Carter, a 49-year-old black man who seemed to carry an island of calm in the storm. His navy suit, tailored but understated, hugged his broad shoulders, the crisp white shirt beneath gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His short hair, speckled with gray at the temples, framed a face etched with quiet confidence. In his left hand he held a slim leather briefcase, its edges worn from years of travel. In his right, a boarding pass for Horizon Airways Flight 727 to Atlanta, marked first class, seat 1A. James didn't rush or fidget like the others. His steps were deliberate, his dark eyes scanning the gate with the steady focus of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. He paused near a digital kiosk, checking the departure board. The flight was on time, boarding in 15 minutes. A faint smile tugged at his lips, not out of joy, but from the satisfaction of a plan falling into place. James wasn't just any traveler. Unknown to the harried gate agents, the distracted passengers, or the crew prepping the Boeing 737 outside, he was the founder and CEO of Horizon Airways. Every plane, every seat, every uniform bore the weight of his vision, built from decades of grit and defiance against a world that often doubted him. Today, though, he was traveling quietly, blending in as just another face in the crowd. It was a habit he'd developed over the years, to observe, to listen, to see how his airline ran when no one knew the boss was watching. At the boarding desk, Ashley Thompson stood like a sentinel, her posture rigid, her blonde ponytail pulled so tight it seemed to tug at her scalp. At 30, Ashley was in her third year as a flight attendant, a role she wore like a crown. Her navy uniform, pressed to perfection, hugged her frame, the red scarf at her neck tied with military precision. To her, first class wasn't just a section of the plane, it was a standard, a world she guarded fiercely. She'd grown up in a small Illinois town, where appearances mattered more than feelings, and she'd carried that lesson into her career. Keep things orderly, keep them exclusive, and never let anyone slip through who didn't belong. Ashley's sharp green eyes scanned the crowd, catching on James as he approached. Something about him, maybe the understated suit, maybe the way he moved with unhurried ease, set off an alarm in her mind. He didn't look like her usual first-class passengers, the ones with flashy watches or designer luggage. Her smile, practiced and professional, stiffened into something closer to a grimace. She stepped forward, one hand raised like a traffic cop. "Sir," she said, her voice clipped but polite, "economy boarding is at gate 25 down that way." She pointed to the left without breaking eye contact, her tone leaving no room for argument. James stopped, his briefcase swinging gently at his side. For a moment he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, with the faintest raise of an eyebrow, he held up his boarding pass, the bold print of first class, one catching the light. "I'm in first class," he said, his voice low and even, each word carrying a weight that seemed to press against Ashley's chest. "Seat 1A. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Ashley's eyes flicked to the boarding pass, her lips parting slightly as she registered her mistake. A flush crept up her neck, but she masked it with a quick nod. "My apologies," she said, stepping aside, her voice tighter now. James moved past her without another word, his stride unbroken, his back straight as if the encounter hadn't fazed him. But Ashley's heart thudded in her chest, a mix of embarrassment and defiance. She'd been wrong, sure, but something about his calm certainty grated at her. Who did he think he was, walking in like he owned the place? As James disappeared down the jet bridge, Ashley leaned toward her colleague, a younger attendant named Kayla, who was sorting boarding passes behind the desk. "Money doesn't buy manners," Ashley muttered, just loud enough for Kayla to hear. Kayla, barely 22 and still learning the ropes, gave a nervous giggle, unsure how to respond. But the comment didn't go unnoticed. A young woman in a denim jacket, standing a few feet away with a phone in hand, caught every word. Her name was Mia, a 25-year-old graphic designer traveling to Atlanta for a job interview. Mia's thumb hovered over her phone, already recording the scene. She'd started filming when Ashley blocked James, sensing something off. Now her eyes narrowed and she typed a quick caption. This flight attendant just assumed a black man didn't belong in first class. What's going on here? Mia wasn't alone in noticing the tension. A middle-aged businessman in a gray suit, waiting near the gate with a Wall Street Journal tucked under his arm, frowned as he overheard Ashley's remark. His name was Tom Reynolds, a frequent flyer who'd seen his share of airport dramas. He didn't know James, but something about the exchange felt wrong, like a note played out of tune. Across from him, a mother named Sarah, juggling a toddler in a diaper bag, glanced up, her mouth tightening. The air around Gate 23 grew heavier, charged with the unspoken weight of what had just happened. Back at the desk, Ashley tried to shake off the encounter. She busied herself with the boarding scanner, her fingers moving faster than necessary. Just doing my job, she told herself, the words a flimsy shield against the unease creeping into her gut. She'd always prided herself on her instincts, her ability to spot problems before they became issues. First class was her domain, and she wasn't about to let anyone disrupt its order. But deep down, a small voice whispered that she'd misjudged this one, and the thought made her jaw clench. Kayla, sensing Ashley's mood, ventured a question. You think he's really first class? He didn't even argue. Ashley shot her a look, her lips pursed. Doesn't matter, she said. He had the ticket. But you don't just waltz into first class looking like that. She didn't finish the thought, but the implication hung between them. Kayla nodded, unsure, and turned back to her work. Ashley's words, though quiet, carried a venom that made Kayla's stomach twist. She'd grown up in a diverse Chicago neighborhood, and something about Ashley's tone felt like a slap she couldn't quite name. Meanwhile, James moved down the jet bridge, the narrow tunnel echoing with the hum of the plane's systems warming up outside. The fluorescent lights cast long shadows, and the air grew cooler, tinged with the metallic scent of aviation. He didn't look back, didn't need to. He'd faced moments like this before countless times in boardrooms, hotels, airports. The assumptions, the quick judgments, the subtle slights. They were as familiar as the weight of his briefcase. But familiarity didn't mean acceptance. Each one stung, a reminder of the world he'd fought to rise above. Today, though, he wasn't here to fight. He was here to watch, to see how his airline treated its passengers when the CEO wasn't announced with fanfare. As he reached the aircraft door, a ground crew member, a wiry man named Carlos with a clipboard, gave him a nod. Welcome aboard, sir, Carlos said, his smile genuine. James returned the nod, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. Carlos didn't know who he was, but the small gesture of respect was enough to ease the tension in James's shoulders. He stepped onto the plane, the soft hum of the cabin greeting him like an old friend. Back at the gate, the boarding process continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Mia, the woman with the phone, uploaded her video to X, her fingers flying over the screen. Flight attendant just humiliated a guy for no reason, she posted, tagging Horizon Airways. The video was shaky but clear. Ashley's raised hand, her sharp words, James's calm response, and her muttered insult. Within minutes it had a dozen likes, then 100. Comments poured in. Is this racial profiling? Horizon needs to do better. Mia didn't know the full story, but she knew what she'd seen, and she wasn't about to let it slide. Tom, the businessman, folded his newspaper and stood, joining the first-class boarding line. As he passed Ashley, he caught her eye, his expression hard. You might want to check tickets before you make assumptions, he said, his voice low but pointed. Ashley froze, her scanner pausing mid-air. It was a mistake, sir, she said, forcing a smile. Tom shook his head and moved on, his words lingering like a warning. Sarah, the mother with the toddler, approached next, struggling to balance her son on her hip while digging for her boarding pass. Ashley's smile returned, but it was strained. Let me help, she said, reaching for Sarah's bag. Sarah nodded, grateful, but her eyes darted toward the jet bridge where James had disappeared. That wasn't right what you did, she said softly, almost as if she didn't mean to say it aloud. Ashley's hand faltered, the bag slipping slightly. I'm sorry, she said, her voice sharp. Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. Just be careful, she said, taking her bag and hurrying off. Ashley stood there, her pulse racing. The gate was emptying now, the last stragglers boarding. Kayla glanced at her, concerned. You okay? She asked. Ashley nodded, but her hands were shaking as she packed up the boarding scanner. Fine, she snapped, though she was anything but. The encounter with James, the comments from Tom and Sarah, the weight of her own words, they were piling up, a storm she couldn't outrun. She told herself it was nothing, just a misunderstanding. She'd been thorough, that's all. First class had standards and she was protecting them. But the lie felt thinner with every passing second. As she grabbed her tablet and headed for the jet bridge, Ashley's mind raced. She didn't know why James Carter had unsettled her so much. Maybe it was his calm, the way he hadn't flinched under her scrutiny. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at her. Not with anger, but with something deeper, something that made her feel small. Whatever it was, she pushed it down, burying it beneath the armor of her uniform. She had a flight to work, a cabin to manage. She'd prove she was right, that she was in control. But as she stepped onto the plane, the faint buzz of her phone in her pocket told a different story. Notifications were piling up, mentions, tagged posts, a video she didn't yet know existed. The world was watching, and Ashley Thompson was about to learn that some mistakes couldn't be brushed off with a tight smile and a crisp scarf. The interior of Horizon Airways Flight 727 gleamed with the polished elegance of first class, a stark contrast to the frenetic chaos of Gate 23. Wide leather seats, spaced like private islands, glowed under soft amber lighting. A faint hum of the plane's systems mingled with the rustle of passengers settling in. Some sipped complimentary orange juice. Others tucked plush blankets over their laps. The air carried a subtle scent of lavender from the cabin's diffusers, designed to soothe the nerves of those who could afford the luxury. But beneath the curated calm, a storm was brewing, one that had followed James Carter from the gate and was about to erupt in Seat 1A. James sat by the window, his navy suit still immaculate despite the morning's tension. His briefcase rested in the overhead bin, and his hands lay folded in his lap, fingers interlaced with the quiet strength of a man who'd faced worse than a flight attendant's scorn. At 49, James Carter had built Horizon Airways from a single lease plane into a national carrier, defying every doubter who saw only his skin and not his vision. His dark eyes gazed out at the tarmac, where ground crews in neon vests scurried like ants. He wasn't angry, not yet. But the slight at the gate, Ashley Thompson's sharp words and sharper assumptions, had lodged in his chest like a splinter. He'd felt it before, too many times, and each one carved a little deeper. Across the cabin, Ashley stepped aboard, her heels clicking softly against the carpeted aisle. Her tablet was clutched tightly, a lifeline to the order she craved. The encounter with James at the gate still burned in her mind, a mix of embarrassment and defiance. She told herself she'd been right to question him. First class was her domain, and she had standards to uphold. But the looks from passengers like Tom, the businessman, and Sarah, the mother, gnawed at her. Their words, "That wasn't right. Be careful," echoed like accusations she couldn't shake. As she scanned the cabin, her eyes landed on James in 1A, and her stomach twisted. He looked too comfortable, too composed, as if her challenge hadn't touched him at all. Ashley's colleague, Susan Miller, a 45-year-old senior flight attendant with soft brown hair pinned neatly back, noticed the tension in Ashley's posture. Susan had seen enough flights to read a cabin like a book, and this one was already dog-eared with trouble. She gave Ashley a subtle nod, a silent check-in, but Ashley barely acknowledged it, her focus locked on James. Susan moved quietly, offering warm towels to passengers, her kind eyes lingering on James for a moment. He returned her glance with a small lift of his chin, a gesture of acknowledgement that carried more weight than words. In Seat 3B, Mia, the young graphic designer who'd recorded the gate incident, adjusted her phone, checking the X post she'd uploaded. The video, Ashley's raised hand, James's calm response, the muttered insult had exploded, racking up thousands of views in under an hour. Comments flooded in. "This is why I don't fly Horizon. Racial profiling much?" Mia's heart raced, not with pride but with a mix of anger and responsibility. She hadn't expected the video to spread so fast, but now that it had, she felt tethered to the story, compelled to see it through. She glanced at James, then at Ashley, her thumb hovering over the record button, ready for whatever came next. Ashley, unaware of the digital storm gathering, felt the weight of the cabin's eyes. Passengers weren't just settling in, they were watching, waiting, as if they sensed the unresolved tension from the gate. Tom, the businessman in 2C, opened his laptop but kept stealing glances at James, his fingers pausing over the keys. Sarah, in 4A, rocked her toddler gently, her lips pressed into a thin line as she replayed Ashley's words in her mind. The cabin felt like a stage and Ashley was center spotlight, whether she liked it or not. She took a deep breath, straightening her scarf, and made her way down the aisle. Her heels clicked louder now, each step a declaration of control. But as she neared James, her confidence faltered. Something about him, his stillness, his unyielding calm, unsettled her. It wasn't just that he was in first class, it was how he owned the space, as if the seat, the cabin, the entire plane belonged to him. The thought was irrational, but it fueled a reckless need to assert herself, to prove she hadn't been wrong. "Sir," Ashley said, stopping beside James, her voice loud enough to carry. "I need to verify your boarding pass again." The words came out sharper than she intended, slicing through the cabin's hum. Heads turned. Tom's laptop snapped shut. Sarah's toddler whimpered, sensing the shift. Mia's phone was up in an instant, recording silently from her seat. James opened his eyes slowly, as if roused from a deep thought. He looked at Ashley, his gaze steady but not cruel. Without a word, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the boarding pass, holding it out with the same deliberate calm he'd shown at the gate. Ashley snatched it, her fingers brushing his hand with unnecessary force. The contact was brief but jarring, like a spark igniting dry grass. She stared at the ticket, her eyes scanning for a mistake that wasn't there. First class, one a James Carter. No errors, no excuses. Her face tightened, a flush creeping up her cheeks. She shoved the ticket back toward him, her hand moving too fast, too hard. The paper slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor like a fallen leaf. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Tom leaned forward, his jaw clenched. Sarah clutched her toddler tighter. Mia zoomed in, capturing Ashley's scowl and James's unflinching composure. James leaned down slowly, retrieving the ticket with a grace that made Ashley's rashness look childish. He straightened, his eyes locking onto hers. "You don't know who you're disrespecting," he said, his voice soft but resonant, each word a stone dropped into still water. The cabin fell silent, the hum of the engines the only sound. Ashley's breath caught, her tablet trembling in her hands. She wanted to snap back, to defend herself, but his words pinned her in place, exposing her in a way she couldn't deflect. For a moment she stood frozen, the weight of every stare pressing against her. Then, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she said, "Just doing my job, sir." The lie was thin and she knew it. She turned, her heels clicking faster now, and retreated to the galley, pulling the curtain shut behind her. Inside, she leaned against the counter, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself, wiping her palms on her skirt. "Just a passenger. Just a mistake." But the words felt hollow, like a script she no longer believed. In the cabin, the tension lingered like smoke. Tom muttered something under his breath, shaking his head as he reopened his laptop. Sarah whispered to her toddler, soothing him, but her eyes darted to James, a mix of sympathy and unease. Mia uploaded the new clip to X, her fingers shaking as she typed. "It got worse. This flight attendant just threw his ticket on the floor. Horizon Airways explained this." The post joined the first, amplifying the outrage. Hashtags like Horizon Bias and Respect All Passengers began trending, though Ashley remained blissfully unaware, hidden behind the galley curtain. Susan, moving through the cabin with a tray of drinks, sensed the shift. She paused near James, lowering her voice. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked, her tone warm but cautious. James nodded once, his expression softening slightly. "Fine," he said, though his eyes told a different story. Susan didn't press. She'd seen enough flights go sideways to know when to step back, but she made a mental note to keep an eye on Ashley. Something was off, and it wasn't just a bad day. Ashley, in the galley, tried to steady herself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it, assuming it was a friend or a reminder. She didn't know that her actions were now a viral spectacle, dissected by strangers across the country. Instead, she focused on the task at hand, regaining control. She couldn't let one passenger, no matter how composed, unravel her. First class was her domain and she'd prove it. But the splinter of doubt planted at the gate was growing, and no amount of self-assurance could dislodge it. Mid-flight, as the plane leveled out at 35,000 feet, Ashley made a desperate move to salvage her mistake. She poured a glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the cabin's light, and approached James with a forced smile. "A gesture of goodwill, sir," she said, her voice straining to sound sincere. The cabin watched, breath held. Tom's fingers froze on his keyboard. Mia's phone was up again, recording. James looked at the glass, then at Ashley, his gaze piercing. "Keep it," he said, his tone polite but heavy with meaning. "Goodwill starts with respect." The rejection was a slap, sharp and public. Ashley's smile faltered, her hand trembling as she clutched the glass. She nodded quickly, retreating to the galley, the champagne sloshing slightly. The cabin buzzed with whispers, passengers exchanging glances. Mia's video captured it all, her caption blunt. She tried to apologize with champagne. He wasn't having it. Horizon Airways. In the galley, Ashley set the glass down, her hands shaking so badly she nearly spilled it. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. "What is wrong with me?" she thought, the question clawing at her. She'd meant to fix things, to smooth it over, but James's words, "Goodwill starts with respect," cut deeper than any insult could have. They weren't just a rebuke. They were a mirror, forcing her to see the arrogance she'd wrapped herself in. She'd always prided herself on her instincts, her ability to read people. But now those instincts felt like a trap, exposing a bias she hadn't dared name. Susan slipped into the galley, her expression unreadable. "Ashley, what's going on?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Ashley opened her eyes, startled. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just a difficult passenger." Susan raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "That passenger didn't start the trouble," she said, her tone gentle but pointed. "You did." Ashley's jaw tightened, but she couldn't argue. Susan didn't push, just gave her a long look before returning to the cabin. Alone again, Ashley checked her phone, unable to ignore the buzzing any longer. Her screen was flooded with notifications, mentions, tagged posts, messages from friends. She opened the app and her heart stopped. Mia's video stared back at her, the gate incident and the ticket fiasco side by side, each with thousands of retweets. Comments tore into her. "Racist much. Fire her. Horizon, do something." Her breath came in short gasps, the galley walls closing in. She didn't know who James Carter was, but she knew one thing. Her mistake was no longer private. It was a spectacle, and the world was judging her. In seat 1A, James sat quietly, his eyes half closed, his hands still folded. He didn't know about the videos, didn't need to. He'd felt the cabin's tension, the weight of every glance. It was familiar, this silent scrutiny, but it never got easier. He thought of the airline he'd built, the countless hours, the battles won and lost. He created Horizon to be different, to treat every passenger with dignity, no matter their seat or their skin. Today he'd seen how far his vision still had to go. But he wasn't here to lash out. He was here to wait, to see what Ashley and Horizon would do next. The plane sailed through the clouds, steady and smooth, but the cabin below was anything but. Passengers whispered, phones glowed with X feeds, and Ashley stood in the galley, her world unraveling. She didn't know it yet, but the worst was still to come. And in seat 1A, James Carter waited, his calm a quiet promise that this flight would change everything. The first-class cabin of Horizon Airways Flight 727 hummed with a deceptive calm as the plane sliced through the clouds at 35,000 feet. The soft clink of ice in crystal glasses and the rustle of pages turning in glossy magazines filled the air. But beneath the polished surface, a current of unease pulsed. The events at the gate and the escalation in the cabin had left an invisible fracture, one that every passenger felt but none dared name. In seat 1A, James Carter sat with the stillness of a man who'd weathered countless storms, his dark eyes fixed on the endless blue beyond the window. At 49, he was no stranger to moments like this, moments where the world judged him before he'd spoken a word. But today, the weight of those judgments was heavier, carried not just by one flight attendant but by the airline he'd built from nothing. Ashley Thompson stood at the far end of the cabin, her tablet clutched like a shield. Her navy uniform, once a source of pride, felt suffocating now, the red scarf at her neck tightening with every shallow breath. At 30, she'd always seen herself as the gatekeeper of first class, a role she wielded with precision and confidence. But now that confidence was crumbling. James's words, "You don't know who you're disrespecting," looped in her mind, each repetition sharper than the last. Her failed attempt to smooth things over with a glass of champagne, met with his piercing rejection. Goodwill starts with respect, had left her exposed, the cabin's eyes burning into her back. She told herself she'd followed protocol, that she'd been thorough, but the lie was unraveling faster than she could rebuild it. The passengers, too, were restless. Tom Reynolds, the businessman in 2C, had abandoned his laptop, his fingers drumming on the armrest as he stole glances at James. Sarah, the mother in 4A, rocked her toddler gently, but her eyes flickered between Ashley and James, a quiet anger simmering beneath her exhaustion. In 3B, Mia, the graphic designer who'd recorded the incidents at the gate and in the cabin, checked her phone obsessively. Her ex-posts had gone viral, amassing tens of thousands of views. The latest video, Ashley tossing James's ticket to the floor, followed by his calm rebuke, had sparked a firestorm. Hashtags like Horizon Bias and Respect All Passengers trended nationwide, with comments ranging from outrage, "This is blatant racism," to calls for action, "Boycott Horizon." Mia's hands trembled as she read the notifications, her anger mixed with a growing sense of responsibility. She hadn't meant to start a movement, but now she was at its center, her phone a ticking bomb. Susan Miller, the 45-year-old senior flight attendant, moved through the cabin with practiced grace, offering refills and warm smiles. But her eyes were sharp, catching every glance, every whisper. She'd seen Ashley's missteps, the gate confrontation, the ticket fiasco, the champagne blunder, and she knew they weren't just mistakes. They were a pattern, one that could sink a career, maybe even the airline's reputation. Susan paused near James, lowering her voice. "Anything you need, sir?" she asked, her tone carrying a warmth that felt like an apology for Ashley's actions. James shook his head, his expression softening slightly. "I'm good," he said, but his voice held a quiet resolve, as if he were biding his time. Ashley, stationed near the galley, felt the cabin's tension like a physical weight. Every step she took, every glance she caught, reminded her of the splinter she'd driven deeper with each move. Her phone, tucked in her pocket, buzzed relentlessly, but she didn't dare check it. She didn't know about the videos, the hashtags, the thousands of strangers dissecting her every word. All she knew was that James Carter, sitting calmly in 1A, was unraveling her carefully constructed world. She tried to focus on her duties, checking the service list, straightening headrests, but her hands shook, betraying the panic rising in her chest. "Get it together," she muttered to herself, wiping her palms on her skirt. "He's just a passenger. You're in charge." But she wasn't in charge, not anymore. The cabin had become a courtroom, and Ashley was on trial, judged by passengers who'd seen too much and a man who'd said too little. She glanced at James, his profile sharp against the window's light, and a reckless impulse surged. She couldn't let him win, not like this, not with his infuriating calm. She needed to reclaim control, to prove she wasn't the villain they thought she was. The thought was irrational, but it propelled her forward, her heels clicking down the aisle with purpose. "Sir," she said, stopping beside James, her voice louder than necessary, "I need to confirm your identification matches the ticket." The request was absurd, a breach of protocol, and she knew it. Passengers didn't need ID checks once boarded, not in first class, not ever. But Ashley's desperation had overtaken her judgment, her need to assert authority blinding her to the consequences. The cabin fell silent, every eye turning to the confrontation. Tom's jaw tightened, his pen dropping to his tray table. Sarah's toddler stirred, sensing the tension. Mia's phone was up, recording, her breath held as she captured the moment. James turned slowly, his eyes meeting Ashley's with a calm that felt like a rebuke. "You've seen my ticket," he said, his voice low but resonant, each word measured. "Twice. You know who I am." The simplicity of his response was devastating, exposing Ashley's overreach without raising his voice. She faltered, her tablet trembling in her hands. "It's standard procedure," she lied, her voice cracking. "I need to ensure." "Enough." The word came not from James but from Tom, the businessman, who stood abruptly, his face red with indignation. You've checked his ticket. You've humiliated him. Let it go. His voice carried the weight of a man tired of watching injustice unfold. Passengers murmured in agreement, a low hum of discontent. Sarah nodded, her eyes fierce. Mia typed furiously, live tweeting. Flight attendant won't stop harassing this guy. Now passengers are calling her out. Horizon Airways. Ashley's face burned, her knees threatening to buckle. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The cabin was no longer hers. It belonged to James, to Tom, to the passengers who'd seen her unravel. She turned to retreat, but before she could, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and authoritative. Miss Thompson. Michael Evans, the 44-year-old operations manager, stood at the front of the cabin, his sharp suit and polished badge marking him as someone who didn't appear without reason. His face was calm but stern, his eyes locking onto Ashley with the intensity that made her freeze. Michael had boarded quietly, unnoticed by most, on a routine inspection trip. But now his presence was a thunderclap, silencing the cabin. Step back, he said, his voice low but firm. Ashley obeyed, her tablet slipping slightly in her grip. Michael turned to James, his demeanor shifting to one of deference. Mr. Carter, he said, bending slightly at the waist, a gesture of respect that sent a ripple of confusion through the cabin. My apologies for the disruption. Is there anything you need? James nodded once, his expression unreadable. Not at the moment, he said, his voice steady. The exchange was brief but loaded, a signal that something monumental was about to unfold. Ashley's heart pounded, her mind racing to make sense of Michael's deference. Why was a senior manager bowing to a passenger? She glanced at Susan, who stood near the galley, her face pale with realization. The passengers too sensed the shift. Tom sat down slowly, his anger replaced by curiosity. Sarah clutched her toddler, her eyes wide. Mia's phone remained steady, capturing every second, her ex-followers now in the tens of thousands. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the approach. But the usual calm of landing preparations was shattered when Michael stepped forward again, this time holding a small wireless microphone. The cabin went deathly quiet, every passenger leaning forward, sensing history in the making. Michael cleared his throat, his voice strong and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a very special guest traveling with us today in seat 1A. Heads turned instantly to James, some passengers craning their necks to see better. Ashley's knees buckled, her hands gripping the galley counter to stay upright. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, the world narrowing to Michael's next words. It is our great honor to welcome Mr. James Carter, he continued, founder, chairman and chief executive officer of Horizon Airways, the parent company of the airline you're flying with today. A collective gasp swept through the cabin, loud enough to drown out the hum of the engines. Mouths dropped open, eyes widened in disbelief. Tom's pen fell to the floor, forgotten. Sarah's toddler giggled, oblivious to the shock rippling around him. Mia's phone shook in her hands, her live stream now watched by thousands. Comments flooding in. He's the CEO? This is unreal. Susan stood frozen near the galley, her hands clasped tightly, a mix of awe and dread on her face. Ashley felt the blood drain from her face, her ears ringing so loudly she barely heard Michael's next words. The man she doubted, humiliated, and challenged wasn't just a passenger. He was the owner of the airline, every plane, every seat, every uniform, including the one she wore. The man whose name adorned company newsletters, whose vision had built Horizon from a dream into a reality, was the same man she dismissed as unworthy of first class. The weight of her actions crashed over her, a tidal wave of shame and fear. Michael handed the microphone to James with a respectful nod. James stood slowly, his 6-foot frame towering over the cabin, his presence commanding without effort. His navy suit seemed to absorb the light, his eyes scanning the passengers with a calm that belied the storm he'd endured. He raised the microphone, his voice deep and resonant, cutting through the silence like a blade. Respect isn't worn on the outside, he said, each word deliberate, each pause heavy with meaning. It's not stitched into a jacket or pinned to a name badge. It's in how we treat people when we think no one's watching. The cabin was still, every passenger hanging on his words. Ashley stood behind the galley curtain, her hands trembling, feeling every syllable slice through her. James's eyes swept the room, landing briefly on her not with anger, but with a clarity that forced her to see herself as she was. I built this airline to be a place where every passenger, from 1A to the back row, feels valued, he continued. Today I saw how far we still have to go. But change starts with truth, and truth starts with accountability. He handed the microphone back to Michael with a quiet thank you, then sat down, crossing one leg over the other as if nothing had happened. But the silence that followed was deafening, a heavy, reverent hush that spoke louder than any applause. Passengers sat stunned, some nodding in respect, others whispering in awe. Mia's live stream exploded, comments pouring in. This man is a legend. Horizon better fire that attendant. The video had reached news outlets with headlines already forming. Horizon Airways CEO humiliated by flight attendant. Michael turned to Ashley, his expression grave. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice carrying across the cabin. Step forward. The word struck like a gavel, and Ashley's legs moved on their own, stiff and unsteady. She walked down the aisle, feeling every pair of eyes follow her, each step a mile in her mind. She stopped near the first row, standing awkwardly beside Michael, her tablet forgotten in her hands. James remained seated, his eyes on her, calm but unreadable. Due to the events witnessed by passengers and crew today, Michael said, his tone formal, and due to a direct violation of Horizon Airways ethics and customer service standards, flight attendant Ashley Thompson will be removed from duty immediately pending an internal review. A gasp echoed through the cabin, sharper this time. Tom shook his head, his anger softening into pity. Sarah looked away, unable to meet Ashley's eyes. Mia's phone captured the moment, her followers now in the hundreds of thousands. Michael continued, his voice unwavering. An apology is not just expected, it is required. Miss Thompson, the floor is yours. The silence was suffocating, the cabin holding its breath. Ashley opened her mouth, but for a long moment no words came. Her throat closed, shame and fear locking her voice in her chest. She looked at James, his calm gaze a mirror she couldn't escape. Finally she spoke, her voice small but audible in the deep quiet. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice trembling, I am deeply sorry for how I treated you today. I made assumptions I had no right to make. I disrespected you, humiliated you, and I was wrong. I let my pride and my bias guide me, and I'm ashamed. Her eyes burned, but she blinked back the tears, knowing this wasn't the time for crying. It was the time for truth, raw and unfiltered. James listened, his expression unchanged. He didn't interrupt, didn't soften or scowl. He simply let her words hang in the air, their weight pressing down on her. When she finished, she stood still, her head slightly bowed, bracing for his response. Part of her expected anger, a demand for her firing, a public dressing down to match her offense. But James only nodded once, slow and measured, then turned his gaze back to the window, dismissing her without a word. The gesture was more devastating than any outburst could have been. Ashley's shoulders sagged, the last of her defenses crumbling. Michael gestured for her to step back, and she obeyed, retreating to the galley, her legs barely holding her up. The cabin remained silent, passengers processing the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. Mia ended her live stream, her hands shaking as she typed. She apologized, but it's not enough. Horizon Airways needs to do better. As the plane touched down in Atlanta, the soft thud of the wheels felt like a final verdict. The seatbelt sign chimed off, but no one rushed to stand. The usual bustle of landing was muted, passengers moving slowly, stealing glances at James. He remained seated, his hands folded, his face calm but resolute. Ashley stood behind the galley curtain, her heart pounding, knowing the flight was over but her reckoning had just begun. Outside, the world was waiting. Mia's videos had reached national news, with reporters already gathering at the terminal, hungry for a statement from Horizon Airways. Ashley's phone, still in her pocket, buzzed with notifications, friends, colleagues, strangers, all weighing in on her mistake. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All she could see was James Carter, the man she'd wronged, the man who'd turned her world upside down with nothing but his presence and his truth. The wheels of Horizon Airways Flight 727 touched down in Atlanta with a gentle thud, the plane gliding smoothly to the gate under a sky bruised with the first hints of dusk. Inside the first-class cabin, the usual post-landing bustle, passengers unbuckling seat belts, reaching for overhead bins, was muted, as if the air itself held its breath. The revelation of James Carter's identity as the CEO of Horizon Airways, coupled with Ashley Thompson's public apology, had left a heavy silence, thick with awe, shame, and unspoken questions. In seat 1A, James sat calmly, his navy suit still pristine, his hands folded in his lap. At 49 he'd faced countless slights, but this one on his own airline cut deeper. Yet his face showed no anger, only a quiet resolve, as if he were waiting for the world to catch up to his truth. Ashley stood behind the galley curtain, her trembling hands clutching the counter for support. Her navy uniform, once a badge of authority, now felt like a costume she no longer deserved. At 30, she'd built her identity around control of the cabin, of appearances, of who belonged where. But now that control was gone, stripped away by her own actions and James's piercing words. Respect isn't worn on the outside. Her apology, forced and faltering, had been a desperate attempt to salvage something: her job, her pride, her sense of self. But as she stood in the galley, the weight of her mistake pressed down like a collapsing sky. She didn't know about the viral videos, the trending hashtags, or the news crews gathering outside. All she knew was that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and the consequences were closing in. The seatbelt sign chimed off and passengers began to move, their actions slow and deliberate. Tom Reynolds, the businessman in 2C, grabbed his briefcase but paused to glance at James, his earlier anger replaced by a nod of respect. Sarah, the mother in 4A, adjusted her toddler's backpack, her eyes avoiding Ashley as she whispered to her son, "Let's go, sweetie." In 3B, Mia, the graphic designer whose videos had set the internet ablaze, packed her phone with shaking hands. Her ex-posts had reached millions, with news outlets like CNN and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution picking up the story. Headlines screamed, "Horizon Airways CEO humiliated by flight attendant," and "Viral video exposes bias on Flight 727. Mia felt a mix of pride and dread. She'd exposed a wrong, but the firestorm she'd ignited was bigger than she'd imagined. Susan Miller, the 45-year-old senior flight attendant, moved through the cabin, securing trays and offering polite goodbyes. Her kind eyes lingered on Ashley, who remained hidden behind the curtain. Susan had seen careers end over less, and the look on her face was one of pity laced with warning. She approached James, lowering her voice. "Safe travels, sir," she said, her tone carrying an apology for the airline's failure. James nodded, a faint smile breaking through his stoic mask. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but firm. Susan moved on, but her heart was heavy. She knew Ashley's reckoning was far from over. As passengers filed out, Michael Evans, the 44-year-old operations manager, appeared at the front of the cabin, his sharp suit and stern expression a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding. He held a small folder, its edges crisp, its contents ominous. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice cutting through the cabin's hum. "Please step forward." Ashley's heart stopped, her legs moving mechanically as she emerged from the galley. The walk to the front felt endless, each step echoing in her ears like a drumbeat. She stopped beside Michael, her tablet forgotten, her hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. The remaining passengers paused, watching, their phones discreetly raised to capture the moment. Michael's face was a mask of professionalism, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of disappointment. As stated earlier, he began, his voice formal, "Due to your violation of Horizon Airways ethics and customer service standards, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Security will escort you to the crew office upon deplaning." The words landed like blows, each one stripping away a piece of Ashley's identity. A soft gasp rose from the last passengers, their murmurs blending with the hum of the plane's systems. Mia, lingering near the exit, typed a final update. "She's been suspended. Justice served? Horizon bias." Ashley's face flushed hot and cold, her throat so dry she couldn't swallow. She nodded stiffly, unable to speak, her eyes fixed on the floor. Michael handed her the folder, its weight heavy in her hands. "You'll receive further instructions in the crew office," he said, his tone clipped. "A disciplinary hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning." He paused, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You should know Mr. Carter could have demanded your termination on the spot. He didn't. Don't waste that mercy." Ashley's eyes widened, a flicker of hope battling the shame flooding her chest. But before she could process his words, Michael turned and exited, leaving her alone in the spotlight of the cabin's judgment. The plane emptied, leaving only the crew and a hollow silence. Susan approached Ashley, her expression soft but firm. "Go change out of your uniform," she said quietly. "You can't wear it now." Ashley nodded, her movements robotic as she grabbed her bag and headed to the crew lavatory. Inside, she locked the door and leaned against the sink, staring at her reflection. Her blonde ponytail was still perfect, her makeup flawless, but the woman in the mirror was a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, stripped of the arrogance that had defined her. She untied her scarf, unbuttoned her jacket, and folded them carefully, as if preserving a relic of a life she'd already lost. When she emerged in civilian clothes, a plain black sweater and jeans, she felt naked, exposed in a way her uniform had always shielded her from. 2 security officers waited at the aircraft door, their faces blank but their presence a stark reminder of her fall. "This way, ma'am," one said, gesturing toward the jet bridge. Ashley followed, her head bowed, the folder clutched to her chest. The jet bridge was cold, its metallic walls echoing her footsteps. Through the wide terminal windows, she caught a glimpse of James Carter outside, standing near a sleek black car, a driver holding the door open. He paused, looking back at the terminal, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Ashley wondered if he was thinking of her, or if she was already a footnote in his day. Then he slid into the car and was gone, leaving her with the weight of her own choices. At the terminal gate, the world Ashley had known collapsed further. A small crowd of reporters had gathered, their cameras flashing as passengers from Flight 727 emerged. Mia, stepping into the terminal, was swarmed by a local news crew. "You posted the videos," a reporter said, thrusting a microphone forward. "What happened on that flight?" Mia hesitated, then spoke, her voice steady. "The flight attendant assumed a black man didn't belong in first class. She humiliated him, even after he showed his ticket. Turns out he's the CEO." The crowd murmured, cameras zooming in. Ashley, escorted by security, slipped past unnoticed, but the reporters' voices followed her, their words a knife in her gut. In the crew office, a small, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and toner, Ashley sat alone at a plain wooden table. Her badge and ID were placed in an envelope before her, a symbolic funeral for her career. The security officers left, and the door clicked shut, sealing her in with her thoughts. She opened the folder Michael had given her, her eyes scanning the printed letter. Suspension pending investigation. Immediate review of conduct. Mandatory sensitivity and diversity training. The words blurred as tears welled up, but she blinked them back, refusing to cry. Not here, not now. Her phone, silent during the flight, now buzzed incessantly. She hesitated, then unlocked it, and the floodgates opened. X notifications filled the screen, hundreds of mentions, thousands of retweets. Mia's videos were everywhere, dissected by strangers, coworkers, even friends. Comments stung like lashes. Racist and incompetent. She doesn't deserve that uniform. Horizon, fire her now. A message from her best friend Lauren popped up. Ash, what happened? Everyone's talking about it. Call me. Another from her mother. I saw the news. Please tell me this isn't you. Ashley's stomach churned, her fingers trembling as she scrolled. A news alert from CNN read, Horizon Airways faces backlash after CEO mistreated on flight. Her name wasn't mentioned yet, but the video showed her face, her uniform, her shame. She closed the app, unable to bear it, and leaned back in the chair, the ticking clock on the wall mocking her. The room felt smaller with every second, the walls pressing in as her mind replayed the flight. James's calm rebuke, Michael's stern dismissal, the passengers' gasps. She'd always thought of herself as fair, professional, a guardian of standards. But now she saw the truth. She judged a man based on nothing but his appearance, and that judgment had unraveled her life. The realization was a cold, sharp blade, cutting through the lies she told herself. The door creaked open, and Karen Lewis, a crew supervisor in a navy blazer, stepped in, her clipboard tucked under her arm. Her face was calm but unsmiling, her eyes assessing Ashley like a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Ashley, she said, sitting across the table. You understand why you're here? Ashley nodded, her throat too dry to speak. Karen continued, her voice clinical. We've reviewed passenger statements, crew reports, and the videos circulating online. A disciplinary hearing is set for 8 a.m. tomorrow. Until then, you're suspended without pay. Ashley swallowed hard, the words sinking in. What happens next? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Karen adjusted her glasses, her expression softening slightly. You have two options. Resign now and the review ends, but your record will note the incident. Or attend the hearing, face the board, and accept their decision whatever it is. Ashley's mind screamed to quit, to run from the shame, to hide from the world that was tearing her apart. But another part, small but stubborn, refused. She'd run from her faults too long, hiding behind her uniform, her smile, her standards. I'll attend, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Karen nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. Be here at 8 sharp. Civilian clothes. No uniform. The instructions were clear. Ashley was no longer a flight attendant, not now, maybe not ever. Karen stood, gathering her clipboard, but paused at the door. For what it's worth, she said, her voice dropping. Mr. Carter called the board after landing. He didn't demand your firing. He asked that you be given a chance to learn from this. Ashley's breath caught, a tear escaping despite her efforts. Mercy from the man she'd wronged was more than she deserved, and it hurt worse than any punishment could have. Alone again, Ashley sat in the silence, the clocks ticking, now a metronome to her thoughts. She thought of her life outside the airline, her small apartment in Midtown, her weekly dinners with Lauren, her mother's proud calls after every promotion. All of it felt distant now, tainted by the videos, the headlines, the truth of who she'd been. She opened her phone again, unable to resist, and found a new message from Kayla, her colleague from the gate. I'm sorry, Ash. People are saying awful things. I didn't know it would get this bad. The words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened Ashley's isolation. Even her allies were apologizing, as if her mistake was a contagion they couldn't touch. She left the crew office, escorted by a single security officer through a side exit to avoid the reporters. The Atlanta terminal was alive with evening travelers, their chatter a cruel reminder of the normalcy she'd lost. She caught snippets of conversation. Did you see that video? Horizon's in trouble now, and quickened her pace, her head down. Outside, the air was humid, the city lights blurring through her unshed tears. She drove home in a daze, the radio buzzing with the talk show discussing the Horizon Airways scandal. She turned it off, the silence of her car louder than any broadcast. At her apartment, a modest one-bedroom with IKEA furniture and a balcony overlooking a noisy street, Ashley collapsed onto the couch, the folder from Michael still unopened in her lap. Her phone buzzed again, Lauren, calling this time. She let it go to voicemail, too raw to face her friend's questions. Instead, she opened X, scrolling through the endless stream of vitriol. A few defended her, maybe she was just doing her job, but they were drowned out by the outrage. A local activist group had organized a protest outside Horizon's headquarters, demanding accountability. A petition for her firing had 10,000 signatures. Ashley dropped the phone, her hands covering her face as the tears finally came, hot and relentless. She thought of James Carter, his calm dignity, his refusal to lash out. He could have destroyed her with a word, but he hadn't. Why? The question gnawed at her, a puzzle she couldn't solve. She replayed every moment, the gate, the ticket, the champagne, the apology, searching for a way to undo it. But there was no undoing, only facing what came next. She opened the folder, reading the letter again, its terms stark. 60 days suspension. Mandatory training. Community service. It was a lifeline, thin and fraying, but a lifeline nonetheless. That night, Ashley barely slept. She lay in bed, the city's hum filtering through her window, her mind a battlefield of shame and defiance. Part of her wanted to fight, to prove the world wrong, to reclaim her place in the sky. But another part, quieter but growing, whispered that fighting meant changing, not defending. She thought of her mother, who'd raised her alone in a small town, teaching her to stand tall, to look the part. But what part had she been playing? A gatekeeper, a judge, a woman who saw skin before soul. The truth was a mirror she couldn't look away from, and it shattered the version of herself she'd clung to. By morning, the news had spread further. Her face was on every major outlet, blurred in some, clear in others. Her name wasn't public. Horizon had withheld it, but her coworkers knew. And their silence was louder than any headline. Lauren texted again. I'm coming over tonight. You don't get to hide. Ashley didn't reply, but the message was a small anchor, a reminder that not everyone had abandoned her. She stood, showered, and dressed in jeans and a hoodie, the civilian clothes a stark contrast to the uniform that had defined her. The disciplinary hearing loomed, a chance to face her fate or lose herself entirely. But as she left her apartment, the weight of the world's judgment followed, a shadow she couldn't outrun. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Ashley Thompson's Midtown Atlanta apartment, casting thin stripes of light across the hardwood floor. At 30, Ashley stood in front of her closet, her fingers hovering over the navy jacket of her Horizon Airways uniform, now a relic of a life she wasn't sure she'd ever reclaim. The past 60 days had been a crucible, burning away the woman who'd boarded Flight 727 with arrogance and blind certainty. In her place was someone new, flawed, humbled, but resolute. Today was her disciplinary hearing, the moment that would decide whether she'd wear that uniform again or lose it forever. She chose a simple gray blouse and black slacks, her hands steady as she dressed, her reflection in the mirror no longer a stranger but a woman ready to face her truth. The drive to Horizon's headquarters was quiet, the Atlanta skyline rising sharp against a cloudless sky. Ashley parked in the employee lot, far from the main entrance, avoiding the familiar faces who might whisper or stare. The building loomed, its glass facade reflecting the city's pulse, but inside the halls felt colder. The framed photos of smiling crews and ribbon-cutting ceremonies a reminder of what she jeopardized. In many of those photos stood James Carter, his calm smile a quiet rebuke. Ashley couldn't linger on them. Her footsteps echoed as she approached the conference room, her heart thudding but her resolve unbroken. The room was stark, a long table lined with 5 serious faces, 2 supervisors, an HR manager, a union representative, and a senior pilot as a neutral observer. A recording device blinked red in the center, its steady pulse a reminder of the stakes. Ashley sat in the lone chair facing them, her folder of completed coursework, service hours, and a written reflection laid out before her. Judith Spencer, the HR manager with iron gray hair, spoke first, her voice clinical. Miss Thompson, you've completed the suspension period and submitted all requirements. Today you'll give your final statement, and we'll decide whether your employment with Horizon Airways is reinstated or terminated. Ashley nodded, her throat dry but her voice steady. I'd like to speak, she said, opening her folder but not looking at it. She'd memorized what she needed to say, not from rehearsal but from the raw truth carved into her over the past 2 months. I was given a gift I didn't deserve, she began, her eyes meeting each board member's. A second chance from Mr. James Carter, a man I judged and disrespected without cause. I treated him and every passenger I ever dismissed with arrogance and bias I didn't even see in myself. I thought my job was to control, to enforce some image of what first class should be. I was wrong. The room was silent, the board members listening intently. Ashley's voice grew stronger, each word a step toward accountability. These 60 days weren't just punishment. They were a mirror, showing me who I'd become. Every hour at the community center, every workshop, every hard conversation forced me to face my blind spots. I humiliated a man who deserved respect, not because of his title, but because he's human. I betrayed this airline's trust, and I'm not that person anymore. I'll never stop learning, but I'm here to prove I can be better if you'll let me. She reached into her folder, pulling out a folded piece of paper, a crayon drawing from a girl named Lily at the community center, showing Ashley handing out sandwiches to stick figures. This is what matters, she said, holding it up, her voice soft but unwavering. Seeing people, respecting them, not for their seat or their suit, but because they exist. I can't undo what I did, but I can choose who I become. I hope you'll give me that chance. If not, I'll carry these lessons forward, no matter where I go. The silence that followed was heavy but thoughtful, not the cold judgment she'd feared. Judith exchanged glances with the others, her pen pausing over her notes. Charles Reed, the union representative, gave a small nod, his eyes assessing but not unkind. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice softer than the others, do you believe this experience has changed how you see your role? Ashley met his gaze unflinching. Yes, she said. I used to think my job was to gatekeep, to protect an image. Now I know it's to make every passenger feel welcome, respected, safe no matter who they are. I forgot that. I won't again. Judith leaned back, her hands folded. Thank you, Miss Thompson. Please wait outside while we deliberate. Ashley stood, her knee steady, and stepped into the hallway, sitting on a hard bench. For 20 minutes she stared at the blank wall, not praying or pleading, but sitting with herself truly for the first time. She thought of the past 60 days, each one a lesson in humility and humanity. The community center, a weathered building in East Atlanta, had been her proving ground. Her first day there she'd expected to breeze through, checking off her 40 hours of service like a chore. Instead, she'd been invisible, ignored by the families who came for food and clothes, their eyes wary or tired. She'd scrubbed floors, sorted donations, carried crates until her arms ached, thinking hard work was enough. But Maria, a 50-year-old volunteer with a sharp tongue and warm eyes, had seen through her. "You're doing the tasks but you're hiding," Maria said one afternoon, wiping her hands on her apron. "These people don't need your hands. They need your heart." The words had stung, but they'd cracked something open in Ashley. She'd started listening to a single mother named Tanya, who spoke of losing her job, to a veteran named Marcus, who shared stories of his service, to Lily, the 10-year-old who drew the crayon picture, her shy smile a gift Ashley hadn't earned. She learned their names, their struggles, their small joys. She sat with them, not just served them, and slowly the walls between her and the people she helped began to crumble. One evening, Lily tugged her sleeve and handed her the drawing, the words "Thank you" Ashley scrawled in shaky letters. Ashley had nearly broken down, the simple act of being seen by a child undoing her more than any viral video could. The workshops on cultural sensitivity and leadership had been harder, forcing her to confront truths she'd avoided. In one session, a facilitator named Dr. Ellis, a black woman with a commanding presence, had asked, "What made you assume that man didn't belong?" Ashley had fumbled, her usual defenses failing. "I don't know," she'd admitted, tears stinging her eyes. "I just did." Dr. Ellis hadn't judged, but her silence had been a challenge, pushing Ashley to dig deeper. She read about systemic bias, listened to stories of injustice, and wrote reflections that felt like confessions. Each word was a step toward unlearning the pride that had blinded her. Back in the hallway, the door opened and Judith called her inside. The board members sat with a new seriousness, their notes stacked neatly. Ashley stood before them, her hands loose at her sides, ready for whatever came. Judith cleared her throat. "Miss Thompson, after careful discussion, we've reached a decision. You will not be terminated." Ashley's breath hitched, a wave of relief crashing over her. "Instead," Judith continued, "you're placed on final warning status. You'll be suspended without pay for an additional 30 days, during which you'll complete advanced training at your expense. You'll also fulfill 20 more hours of community service. Failure to comply will result in immediate dismissal." Charles leaned forward, his voice steady. "You're being given a rare second chance, one not many receive after such a public mistake. Mr. Carter contacted us, requesting you be given room to grow. He said, real leadership invests in others' ability to rise after falling." The words hit Ashley like a tide, washing away the last of her defenses. James Carter, the man she'd wronged, had spoken for her when she had no right to ask. Tears welled up, but she held them back, nodding. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. The meeting ended, and Ashley left the room, the weight of shame lifting but replaced by a heavier responsibility. She drove to the community center that afternoon, not because it was required, but because it was where she needed to be. The familiar smell of soup and cardboard boxes greeted her, and Maria gave her a knowing nod. "Back already?" she teased. Ashley smiled, rolling up her sleeves. "Couldn't stay away," she said, and meant it. She served meals, laughed with Lily over a new drawing, and listened to Tanya's update about a job interview. Each moment was a brick in the foundation she was building, not for Horizon, but for herself. The additional 30 days passed in a blur of workshops and service. Ashley attended sessions on implicit bias, where she shared her story, her voice shaking but honest. She faced skepticism from some participants. How do you change after something like that? But their doubts only fueled her resolve. At the community center, she organized a clothing drive, working late to sort donations, her hands sore but her heart full. Tanya hugged her when she landed the job, and Lily gave her another drawing, this one of them together, holding hands. Ashley tucked it into her wallet, a talisman of her new beginning. When her reinstatement day arrived, Ashley stood before the board again, her folder thicker now, her reflection sharper. "I'm not perfect," she said, "but I'm committed. To this airline, to its passengers, to being someone who lifts others up." The board, impressed by her progress and endorsements from Maria and Dr. Ellis, reinstated her with a 6-month probation and a mentorship role for new hires. "Don't waste it," Charles said, echoing Karen's earlier warning. "I won't," Ashley promised, her voice firm. Her first day back was a modest Atlanta to Denver flight, the kind she once would have scoffed at. Now she welcomed it, her uniform heavier with meaning. In the crew lounge, she arrived early, reviewing the manifest alone. Susan Miller, now her lead, approached, her eyes searching. "Good to have you back," she said, her tone genuine but cautious. "People know what happened. Some will watch you closely." Ashley nodded, unafraid. "Let them," she said. "I'm not hiding." Boarding began and Ashley stood at the front, greeting each passenger with warmth. She noticed the small things: a nervous flyer gripping his ticket, a mother juggling a stroller, an elderly man with a worn suitcase. She saw them, truly saw them, and it changed everything. When Ethan, a new hire, mixed up a seating assignment, she corrected it calmly, moving a passenger to first class with a sincere apology. "Mistakes happen," she told Ethan, smiling. "But respect is what fixes them. Make every passenger feel valued, no matter where they sit." Ethan nodded, the lesson sinking in. During service, Ashley caught her reflection in a coffee pot, the woman staring back, no longer rushing to judge. She was there to serve, not control. Passengers thanked her, one saying, "You made this flight feel special." The words wrapped around her like armor, not against judgment, but for purpose. After landing, she stood by the door, bidding farewell. An older woman paused, her hand on Ashley's arm. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. Ashley's throat tightened, but she smiled, nodding. In Denver's terminal, as the crew prepared for the return flight, Ashley spotted a familiar figure near a coffee stand. James Carter, in a dark suit, stood alone, checking his watch. Their eyes met, and she felt a pull, not of fear, but of gratitude. She approached, her step steady. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice clear. He turned, his expression calm but open. "Miss Thompson," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I wanted to thank you," Ashley said, her words earnest. "Not just for my job, but for showing me what respect means. For giving me a reason to be better." James studied her, his eyes thoughtful. "Everyone falls," he said. "Not everyone stands up the right way. You're doing it." He extended his hand, and she shook it, the gesture sealing a chapter neither would forget. "Good luck," he said, turning to leave. Ashley watched him go, the last pieces of her old self falling away. Back in the terminal, she moved forward, her uniform no longer a mask but a promise. She wasn't chasing titles or approval. She was building something real: respect, integrity, humanity. As she blended into the crowd, just another face among thousands, Ashley Thompson carried a truth she'd never forget. The greatest seat isn't in first class. It's in how you lift others along the way. Well, folks, buckle up, because Ashley Thompson's wild ride on Flight 727 just landed us right back in the real world, where Wi-Fi is spotty, coffee's overpriced, and snap judgments can cost you more than a first-class ticket. Let's be real, we've all had moments where we sized someone up faster than you can say. Boarding group 3. Maybe it was the guy in flip-flops at a fancy restaurant, or the coworker who didn't look like they belonged in the boardroom. But Ashley's story? It's a neon sign flashing, "Check your biases before they check you." In today's world, where ex-posts go viral faster than a sneeze in a crowded elevator, one wrong move can turn you into the internet's villain of the day. Ashley learned that the hard way, but here's the kicker: she didn't just crash and burn. She got up, dusted off her ego, and rebuilt herself, one soup ladle and hard truth at a time. That's the lesson for us in 2025, where we're all one bad tweet away from a public roast. Mistakes happen, but growth is a choice. So, next time you're tempted to judge someone by their cover, take a breath, maybe grab a coffee, and ask yourself, what if they're the CEO of my life's next big opportunity? Humor aside, Ashley's journey reminds us that respect isn't a fancy suit or a tight lights, the small, everyday choices we make when nobody's trending. Whether you're at work, on a date, or stuck in line at the DMV, treating people like they matter can change the game. And who knows? You might just dodge your own viral disaster. So let's get interactive. Drop a comment below. Have you ever misjudged someone and learned a lesson the hard way? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end like James Carter? Share your story, we're all ears, or rather, all eyes. And while you're at it, hit that thumbs up if Ashley's redemption gave you hope that second chances are real. Oh, and one last thing, don't let these stories fly by without you. Smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to catch more tales of triumph, mess-ups, and everything in between. Trust me, you don't want to miss the next flight. Where are you watching from today? Let us know, and let's keep the conversation soaring.